All right. Hey, good afternoon. Welcome to Fire Engineering Humpday Hangout. I got Bobby Halton, Sammy Hittle, and hopefully some of my other cohorts are going to actually dial in and join in. Everybody seems to be busy today, but we're all going to have a good time. It's always a good time with Bobby and Sammy on here. So we're kind of going to jump right into it, but we got to talk about
Walmart had the Ron Popeil fishing pole and potato peeler. So I think that they're all out, fighting the crowds to get to the bargains.
The long list of texts of what I'm doing today.
Ron Popeil, there you go.
But we want to kind of get on. Bobby, give us an update on fire engineering real quick. FDIC, I'm sorry.
Well, things are rocking and rolling. As everybody knows, we're in touch with our good friends out there in the state of Indianapolis and the city of Indianapolis, great state of Indiana, a state that wants to work. I think that's their motto. So anyway, no, things are looking good so far. Obviously we rolled over the 2019 folks to 2020 and we picked up a couple of folks. And obviously we have a few folks that, got promoted, got married, got divorced, whatever. So for whatever reason, some folks did both. So for whatever reason, some folks are in, some folks were out. And so, a couple of new faces we were able to put in there, but we're always, our slate's always open. The advisory board's always willing to look at anybody. And obviously Ricky and Sam help us with those selections. So, if you are somebody out there who was not picked up, there might be an opening. We don't currently have any, but that's what we're looking at as far as the program goes. Everything seems to be right on track. Obviously we're tracking the whole, pandemic issues and trying to stay abreast of all of that. Great read on that. If you like Alex Berenson, he's been writing the unpublished truths about the COVID-19 virus as a pamphlet series, Amazon.com. He just did the third installment of it, which is fascinating. The guy's a former New York Times reporter, brilliant reporter, great reporter, great writer, highly recommend it to anybody. So we're following his work. We're looking at the vaccine outputs. We're following the CDC and the WHO and the WHO and the Fauci's and the other folks and seeing what everybody's saying. But so far, we're like everybody else, highly optimistic that, we're rational optimists. So we're highly optimistic that the vaccines will be widely available and folks will be taking it. And herd immunity, according to the CDC folks, is sometime in May. But obviously that's based on what they know now. If 3 or 4 vaccines are available, simultaneously, that could be, rapidly accelerated or whatever. So like everybody else, we're full steam ahead for the current established dates, and we're obviously watching the situation closely. Our hearts and prayers go to everybody who's been affected by this nasty virus. We had a couple of our own, go down with it and hit them kind of hard, and we've had others that had it and sat home for 14 days, upset because they didn't feel bad, but they had it. So fascinating disease. It's going to be fascinating to see, in hindsight, how we look back on it, right? And one of the problems with that is when the ending, everything else looks so ridiculous that led up to it. You ascribe all kinds of, causality, which may or may not exist. So it'll be interesting to see how historically and epidemiologically we look at this, in the future, which is a conversation for another day. Today we're going to be talking about apartment fires. Got some real neat stuff coming up in fire engineering. Real great. December 10th, I got to plug this one. Johnny Cirillo, who are dear friends with both you guys, he's doing a thing on explosions, fire phenomena on the fire ground. John is just a wealth of information, brilliant guy, experienced, really elegant speaker. So December 10th, you go to Fire Engineering website, you can register for it. You don't want to miss that. That's going to be an amazing webcast. I mean, Cirillo is, Cirillo is, in my mind, one of the top 10 fire experts, firefighting authorities in the world today, obviously, and also just an incredible gentleman, just the highest caliber human being you could possibly want to find. So highly recommend folks, put that on their calendar. Some other great stuff coming up, all kinds of webcasts and training going on, and Of course, Sam Hittle is going to be, doing a series of lectures for it. Just kidding, to throw Sam under the bus. But no, some really good stuff, Ricky. So thanks for asking. It's all looking really good, and we're really looking forward to it, and really hoping that everybody's doing well and riding out this second wave in a safe and effective way. So that's where we're at.
Good. All sounds good. We all want to get back to Indianapolis and see all our friends and do it in a safe way. So let's, we're all fingers crossed that everything's going to pan out there. And
safety third, to quote Mike Rowe. So, and if you go to Mike Rowe's site right now, don't mean to crash Mike's site, but if you go to Mike's site right now, MikeRoweWorks.com, you can get his safety third face masks. And if you know anything about safety and safety third and what that means, it's a wonderful thing. I've got 2 of them personally, so highly recommend.
I've got mine for Sammy. So so when I talk to Sammy,
Safety third. Google that video, you'll love it. But also go to Mike Rowe Works. And remember, what Mike does with that money is, and I think this is something we should talk about in a future hangout, guys. No, dead serious here. We put so much emphasis on college, but I think that the American Fire Service should place just as much emphasis on anybody who has a trade: plumbing, electrical, framing, you name it, any welding. For us, that kind of work is as important, or maybe more important, than a degree in the history of lesbian dance theory. I mean, and not to put that down, I'm sure there's a ton of important information inside of that. But seriously, I mean, a degree in English Lit is fantastic, great thing to have. But knowing how to weld, or knowing how to do HVAC systems, or understanding refrigeration, or understanding building construction, and how to build a building, that's aces, in my opinion. So I think that we should probably encourage the fire service in general to give equal emphasis to either some kind of certification in any of that. Say you're a certified mechanic. Man, when it comes to spec and apparatus, man, that's freaking a lot more valuable than underwater basket weaving. You know what I mean? And so, and no disrespect to the underwater basket weavers in the world. I'm sure they're wonderful people, but let's get back to the real world here. We need men and women who understand how the world works, not how they want it to work. If you've got a thing in postmodernist theory, that's fantastic, great for the kitchen table. Not very applicable at 3 o'clock in the morning when you're worried about a building falling on your head. So
we're gonna get Sammy's gonna be a locksmith when he retires.
What did you do? So that's a brilliant question. Before we talk about apartment fires, what did you do prior to the? What did you do skill wise prior to the fire service?
Me?
Yeah,
I worked at a fire apparatus dealer, filling fire extinguishers and helping shuttle fire trucks around.
That's pretty blue collar work right there. Yeah.
Till I got let go for being young and stupid, but
Yeah. Sam, what did you do?
I worked in construction and then also built computers back when you actually bought all the parts and put them together.
Wow. So we got a little note from Peter. I'm going to take a look at that real quick in the chat. This is some good stuff. So we're going to get right to ground ladder compliment or multiple dwellings. Well, that's a great question to start us off with. So yeah, like you, I built houses, I did roofing, worked on cars. All that stuff. Yeah. And I went to college, full disclosure. I got the ring, back then they used to have the commercial with Lincoln. Remember, you got to have the paper, Lincoln, in order to get the job. So I got the paper, but while I was getting the paper, I was working on cars and I was building houses and I was putting roofs on and throwing hot tar in Albuquerque in the summer.
Good God.
Can't beat it. So apartment fires, man, let's get into it. So
let's make sure we get a plug out here to Firefighter Nation and Bill Carey this morning. He put up a great story this morning of a fire in Boston today. Ladder 4 in Boston made a really good grab. There's some good video out there. So once you get done with Humpday Hangout, video, please go over to Firefighter Nation and take a look what Bill Carey's posted up there. It's hard to believe that Bill Carey posted something about a truck company doing something, but we appreciate him doing that. So what I kind of wanted to hit on today was
Bill refers to those guys as the firefighters helpers.
I posted something about a Baltimore City ladder truck, and all the Baltimore City engine guys are like, "Oh, you mean the support unit?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's
unit,
it."
Right.
So I wrote down a bunch of stuff to kind of to go over when we're talking about fighting fires in apartment buildings, and I'll kind of rearrange that since Sammy got on. But a couple of things that wanted to talk about was like what resources your department sends to those type of buildings, whether it be an apartment building, with that being a garden apartment. So we're talking like 3 or 4 or 5 stories tall buildings, and obviously garden apartment buildings today are vastly different from what they were when they started in the 60s and the 50s in type of building construction. And that's also one of my topics on here. Engine company challenges.
Well,
company challenges.
I think when you start that, it ties in very well with the first question. You guys got the chat open. We got a good question from Tom Hegmeyer. So when we're talking about a garden apartment, one of the things to remember is they didn't get that name casually. It meant that they open into an area where the apparatus can't operate, right? There's always that kind of that green space, if you will. Used to be green. Sometimes it's paved over, but most of the time it's some kind of area where it's not designed for apparatus traffic. And that's where they got that term garden apartment. So sometimes it's in the back, sometimes it faces the front. And that can pose really, it goes right. So anyway, just so folks know, Tom Hagemeyer, I hope I'm saying it right, Tom. He said, any thoughts on the amount of ground ladder complement for multifamily dwelling apartments for first due ladder companies? Well, Sam, I'll throw that to you. How do they outfit? I can tell you how we do it at our volunteer company, what our rigs are loaded up as far as ground ladders, but what are you doing in Wichita?
We're actually trying to get a better galley on our trucks. We don't have the ladder complement that we want, but again, something we're trying to improve. We have to bring numerous trucks to get all the ladders up. Our ladder culture wasn't really strong 4 or 5 years ago. It's something that's growing. If you look at our apartment fires today, you're going to see 6, 7 ladders thrown to the building. If you were to look at it 4 or 5 years ago, then you would see maybe 1. And with that said, I'm not trying to say anything bad about the department, so I hope guys hear me out on this, but when you're throwing 1 ladder to an apartment, then how many ladders we could put on an apparatus didn't seem like a real important topic. Now that we're actually emptying our beds and throwing everything that we have, now we're starting to look at it and go, okay, how do we get more? Because we're running out. And then if we have time, I would also like to discuss how we throw the ladders to these buildings. I know a pet peeve of mine is guys like to throw them to the front of the balcony. If we're doing metal balconies, then they're probably going to support it fairly well, but it's going to slide around quite a bit. If we have those older garden style apartments that have the wood balconies, those things aren't very strong, right? They're not something you exactly want to lean on. So I don't really want to throw a ladder up against that either. I prefer to see the ladder go up on the side of the balcony, goes up against the building. It gets that support. It gets the support of the balcony. And it also reduces the requirement for firefighters to do a 180-degree turn to get off the ladder. We can kind of sidestep it, and we teach our guys to actually remove part of the balcony. So if they want to get back on the ladder or they have a victim they're trying to get on the ladder, we can just step right off of the decking onto the ladder.
Yeah, I think. Go ahead, Rick. Sorry.
Yeah, I know in the Washington D.C. area, and even in the Baltimore metro region, ground ladders are, the whole area up here is so densely populated with garden apartment buildings that, it's kind of almost like our bread and butter. So, as the ladder trucks have, going back to, old open cab tiller trucks and stuff like that, always carried a lot of ladders. And we went through a phase where we weren't carrying a lot. And now we're back to, trying to carry in excess of 300 feet of ground ladders on every truck. So that's a big point for us. If you look at any building, we all try to model ourselves after the Boston ladder culture, which is, obviously probably one of the top notch ladder cultures in the nation. Just their ability to throw as many ground ladders as they do. Of course, staffing helps when you have all those, you're able to throw all those ladders, but just having all that on the rigs. And, when Sammy talks about throwing them, is that, one of the things that I'm very prideful of the organization that I'm a part of and a lot of the surrounding jurisdictions, is that the ladder culture is just not for when there's a fire. So, if we go there for an odor of smoke, a pot of food or something like that, you see these guys and girls just throwing ground ladders, getting those reps in. So when they go and they have, 3:00 in the morning, they got fire blowing out of 3 or 4 windows and people hanging out the balconies. This isn't something they're going to have to recall from, 5 or 6 months ago. Maybe just 2 days ago, they threw this ladder, whether it be a Sammy Hittle single person 35 or, 2 or 3 people, trying to throw a 35, throwing the 28s, throwing the 24s, roof ladders, whatever they got, they'll dump a whole bed. So once again, I think that piggybacks off the back of the Boston ladder culture that comes in there. And then this area has kind of got into it also. But, when you're riding, I rode a 3-person truck in Fairfax County for decades. And, we get I get 1 or 2 ladders thrown. And then, I'm sticking with the aerial because I'm only one person on the outside. The officer and the bucket person are inside the building doing force entry, doing the searches. So, I'm trying to get my best to get the aerial in position. And, Bobby talked about the garden apartments having that green space. I always just considered that a challenge for me to get my ladder truck in there. So more than once it got stuck, but more than once I got it in the right spot at the right time and was able to put the truck in there. So the powers to be didn't complain about us getting ladder trucks stuck. So that was a good thing. And for my organization now, you get a ladder truck stuck and you actually reach the building. You didn't come up like 100 feet short. You reach the building, you're able to touch the building with the aerial. I'll tow you out all night long. I'll call 5 or 6 tow trucks out. So,
if you make the building, it's mission accomplished. It's when the rig is stuck, 60 feet from the building, in 3 and all the way up to its running boards. So not only do you have to get it pulled out, first you got to dig it out. Those are some of the epic moments in time. Hey son, it's been raining for 11 and a half days. What did you think was going to happen when you drove across the sod? You know what I mean? So, but it's neither here nor there. But so 300 feet, I think that's a hell of a target, and then obviously you're talking probably, 235s, 324s. You start breaking down the numbers to, how that plays out in terms of actual, down to your folding ladders, I guess, if you want to get to the actual footage. But I think it's a great question to ask. And, the cultures for ladders in this country that I'm very familiar with, and I think that do a fantastic job, is obviously some of the majors, whether it's Chicago, the Chicago people. If you want to see a neck and neck race for ladder culture, it's Boston and Chicago. And the Chicago people, they're as aggressive with ladders as anybody. Obviously, the Milwaukee people have thought long and hard about ladders. They have a very elegant ladder culture. They might not throw as many, but they have really, really drilled. Well, you got the Milwaukee ladders, and you want to talk to Eric Roden about how, they've really talked about the ladder on the roof. When you're working off a ladder, that's been placed on the roof, not a tip or a bucket above a roof, but actual ladders. And the whole ladders 3. I lived through all that when ladders 3 was the big thing back in the late 70s, early 80s. Everybody was talking about ladders 3, and that was the basically the beginning of the SOPs on structural firefighting was ladders 3, and that's really, really great stuff. And so I think that having a target like you talked about, Ricky, for each company of so many foot of ladder is a great way to remind people that the importance of throwing ground ladders. I think we do a lot of hose evolutions where it'd be just as easy for the team as they're, after one person's flaking out, for the other person to take a 24 and throw it, just so they have it, at least for themselves in places where, a ladder company may not be arriving as quickly as it is in Wichita or DC or Boston, Chicago, Detroit, Philly. You've got places where they don't have as many ladders, and some departments don't have any at all. So the engine companies are basically, sometimes it's the second or third due quint. It does not at all diminish the necessity to have those ground ladders thrown and up. And so I think that for me, and the drilling on it has become so sophisticated. I apologize. We had a young woman who ran the drills class for FDIC several years ago. Sam, you'll probably remember her name before I do. Wonderful firefighter. She taught me how to do the 35 by myself. I'd never done that until 4 or 5 years ago. Remember that gal's name? Gosh, what was she out of? She was fantastic officer, great firefighter. Anyway, she ran a hands-on class. Now a young woman from Florida has picked up as the lead on it now. I'm trying to remember the original lady's name. But have you done so there is a way to do a 35 raise fairly safely and fairly easily, but you got to drill on it, right? And I had never drilled on it. And she taught me how to do it about 4 or 5 years ago. That was not a drill that was commonplace at all in the fire service when I was on the line. I mean, Sam, when did that come into vogue? Because that's a valuable drill to understand. Seriously.
Sammy, can I start first or?
Yeah, no, please.
And it started in vogue when Sammy and his crew were doing a class for traditions and posted it on the internet and got like 9,000 comments. Well, first of all, they were amazed that someone at Sammy's height could throw a 35, first of all. And then, but I guess they didn't realize he spends all day in the gym. But
I remember that now. And it was Katie Johnson. Thank you, Tom. Tom Hagermeyer, Katie Johnson. Tom threw it out there. Tom, we'll get you other question. So, hey, if you're out there, hashtag FE Talk. Pete Pro Kilo is monitoring that, or Pete, any other way people can get their questions in there. You're going to drive this conversation because I love talking to the folks out there. Katie Johnson. So did Katie take that class from you, Sam? Is that?
No, not that I know of. I talked to Angela a little bit about it. I think one of the big things about the 35 that was creating problems is when we lose the footing because we end up on the wrong side of the center of gravity, then we ultimately change the fulcrum. We go from a class 2 lever to a class 1, which means we can no longer push. Now we've actually got to change our effort into a pulling motion.
And that's what Katie taught me. Nope, you're exactly right. And the other thing to remember too is we used the 35 with tormentor poles made out of freaking oak when I first came on, and they were not fun and they were not light. Now the aluminum ones are a lot easier to manage, but we had, you remember those things, Ricky? You worked with those things, didn't you?
I did tormentor poles, but I'm not talking about wooden ones. I mean, I was out at Pierce a couple months ago, and one of the Los Angeles cities was there, and they had all their wooden ladders, and I tried to lift one of those bad boys. I said, yeah, not happening today, man. I guess I'll either stick in the buggy or stick on an engine company, because there wasn't no way I was lifting that bad boy. Those guys are Herculean in my eyes.
And that was when
look at those guys in San Francisco.
So my muscle memory was based upon a 35-foot wooden ladder. And when I heard that the class they were teaching people how to throw 35s, one person 35s, I was like the people that reacted to you online. Are you out of your bloody freaking mind, pal? Yeah. Yeah. Is that
people had never seen a hobbit throw a 35-foot ladder.
Whoa. Hey, man, the vertically challenged in this country are a protected class now, man.
I wish we were, but no, it really does. I mean, somebody of my height versus somebody of your height, Chief, is legitimately a 33% increase in effort to raise the same ladder.
No, you're exactly right.
Which is fine as long as we understand our ergonomics and how to operate.
Right, and Katie is your height. Katie is right around your height, and she does it. I swear to God, she makes it look like she's throwing a 12-footer. She is so much better at it than I am, obviously. which isn't saying a lot, but she's a wonderful human being. So, okay. So here's a good question from Matt. Let's get to Matt's question. Then we'll go back to the second part of Tom's question. Okay. Buckets and sticks. Ricky?
That's a good, Chris McClune always tries to get me to.
You got to throw the telesquirt in there too, man.
But I'm not throwing a telesquirt in there. You already said the curse word of the day was a quint. So I'm not going to talk about telesquirts. So, but I don't want to make Larry Conley mad, because he rides a quint. So I don't want to make him too mad. So, I always had the best of both worlds. Volunteering, I had a nice aeroscope, and and at work I had a 110-foot E1 ladder, and I liked both of them. But if you're going to pick people off a building, man, that bucket surely makes a great thing to have, especially if you got it's the same length, So we had a 110 aerial, and you have usually a 95 or a 100-foot basket. You never know when you're going to need that extra 10 feet. But when you're trying to pick people off, especially if they're unconscious, getting them in that basket and lowering them to the ground. I mean, obviously, Sammy's rode a tower in Wichita for many years. So he completely understands that basket mentality.
So Sammy?
It's kind of like the question we have in the chat, 24 or a 28. You have to understand your first due, what your needs are, consider your second and third due. But ask yourself your deployment model. I'm truly bothered by do this and you'll get that in the fire service. Our staffing, our strategic objectives, our deployment models, all of those things influence how we operate on the fire ground. The thing is to actually give some serious thought. We carry some 28s for the simple fact that when you look at a Queen Anne's, we can't make the roof with the 24 and have any kind of ladder left to grab onto when we get on and off of that roof. Now you can hit the second floor with 24s on a garden pretty easy, but your angle is going to be different if you try to get to the third.
Well, and you could take a 12-foot roof ladder, throw it to a porch roof, and gain access that way too. So, a tool's a tool. So my take on it, to back Sam up, is that I like sticks for some jobs and I like buckets for other jobs. And I like it when I've got a choice. You know what I mean? I like it when I can position them to their best advantage to the building. You know what I mean? And then, so I don't really have a preference. I enjoy them both, but I'm not really sure that I'm comfortable with these 85 footers. I kind of like that extra 15 feet at minimum. I like 100 foot just because it's me. Because nowadays, and Scott's with us. This is fantastic, man. Now we've got somebody who actually knows what he's talking about, for gosh sakes, with us. So Scott, we're just kind of talking about ladders. We started off by talking about ladder complements for apartment fires, and great question from Tom Hegmeyer. And now we're kind of talking about, buckets and sticks, and that came to us from Matt Brumridge. And we just thought that there's advantages to both. And Tommy Brennan, who was, one of my dearest friends, 111 truck and great officer. He was the same way. You want to be proficient on both types of devices. And I think that the telesquirt is still a really valuable tool. If your organization is large enough to have a complement that includes, a telesquirt and a couple of sticks and a couple of buckets, I think you got all your bases covered. Welcome, Scott.
Hey, how you doing, Chief? Thanks. Sorry, Mike.
You look like you're driving.
Of 4-day breaks and COVID. Kids. Yeah, I had doctor's appointment with the kids today, so just finishing that up. Sounds like an interesting conversation, though.
Yeah, it's a great conversation. So, Sam, why don't you take us into the? You were talking a bit about Tom's second part of his question. 24s and 35s.
Again, it depends on what you're trying to achieve. I know Chief Riley is going to get a good laugh out of this, but if you really want to know what you need, just go out and do the Pythagorean theorem. It's pretty simple. You'll be able to figure out how much ladder you need on the hypotenuse of that triangle to reach your buildings. The 20.
Well, Sam, if you're going to put a hypotenuse on the top of a triangle, I don't know what kind of circus you're running, pal, but the rest of us are just fighting fire.
But I mean, it really depends on what you need. And I don't disagree. You know, you go up from a 24 to a 28, and you go from something that's 14-foot bedded to something that's 16-foot bedded. And that's what's giving guys grief. There's really not that much more weight to it. But when you operate inside of that critical angle, or what I refer to as the critical angle, that 30 degrees to 60 degrees, if I get on the wrong side of the center of gravity, particularly if I'm shorter, you know, if my ladder is here, and as a short person, I'm over here, and I'm on the wrong side of the center of gravity, which means it starts to want to lift up and shift to where my shoulder is the fulcrum, right? Where a taller guy is back here. And so when I add that extra 2 feet, even the taller guy ends up further along that ladder. And that's when it starts to move, and you start to get a negative mechanical advantage where the ladder actually becomes heavier than it is by itself.
Well, and even to a greater degree too, when you're doing the full extent on a ladder, sometimes if you have someone who is of a shorter stature with less of a reach, you'll see a steeper angle on that ladder than you would with someone whose reach was a bit more out, because that's basically the rule of thumb reach is we stick our arms all the way out to get that initial positioning. So
no, you're absolutely right.
Points.
I can show you the numbers where an extra 6 inches of reach can result in 100 pounds difference in effort.
Wow. Well, let's take
I just go out and throw the ladders against the building. That's usually how I do it. I can tell you that Scott and I probably when we rode a truck together, we threw a lot of ground ladders and a lot of aerials, and just figured out which buildings we could do what with. I don't know about this hippopotamus triangle thing you got going on, but whatever it is. But hey, both work though.
I agree.
You know.
I agree with you, Chief. There's nothing like getting out there and putting them on the buildings, and COVID's made it more difficult because everybody's home. But I just beg for forgiveness.
That's better than asking permission. Safety third. Safety third. So it gets interesting. So we've kind of talked about ladders and access. Let's talk about apartments themselves. We got to talk a little bit about garden apartments, but then we also have buildings that were made for apartments. In other words, garden apartments nowadays, usually you're talking maybe 24, 35, 36 rather, units. But back in the day, where I grew up, you'd have an apartment building that may have, 50, 60, over 100 in some of the taller, bigger buildings, where you had H buildings and L buildings and just, different footprints basically of the building for these larger apartment complexes. I know those aren't as frequent, a problem in the American Fire Service because they're more restricted to more developed urban areas, but it's still a very interesting problem when you're talking about, water supply and things like that, and staging. When I mean staging, I mean the positioning of apparatus in and about the building. I don't mean, a complement of crews off in the distance waiting for an assignment. I mean how you position your apparatus around a building like that becomes a real issue in apartments for deploying, people that have to, especially when people have to do search and rescue and, make upwards of, sometimes 15, 20 doors per floor. So
I don't think we can hold it to an urban society anymore. I mean, you can travel anywhere today, drive anywhere, in rural Pennsylvania, and all of a sudden you'll come across an apartment complex that is, 4 floors, like you said, 20, 30, 40, 50 apartments inside that building, and with a courtyard, and the scariest thing, it's built of all wood.
Wow.
There's not a brick in it.
So it's like a new law tenement kind of thing.
Yeah, and then all the the new thing in like the Washington D.C. area, and even as we travel, I was in North Carolina this week for Thanksgiving. It's all the new subdivisions are now they have all the the stores on the first floor and all the living spaces now is above that, to create that, there's a name for it too. And I know Scott knows it's like,
So
town living.
Well, we're calling them the Toothpick Palaces because they're
It's
so
like
they're on
old town living or something. So
right, and basically what they are is they're apartments that are built above either a mercantile or a parking garage on what's considered a non-combustible platform, and then it's just nothing but wood frame. And the worst one that Dugan and I have run across so far, we were outside of King of Prussia, or it may have been in King of Prussia, just outside Valley Forge, and I want to say the thing was 5 or 6 stories tall, and that's an apartment fire. You get, and it also had the balconies, Sam, that you were talking about, those cantilevered balconies. And so if you're trying to access, say somebody on the 3rd floor, you may have to go to the side of one of those balconies. But a hose stretch in there, I've never stretched anything into there. And most of the fires that I've looked at so far in review have all been under construction, and not many of them went well. Montgomery County had a pretty good outcome on one, but it's pretty ice. Remember the Montgomery County, they had that that was a heck of a fire. They did a heck of a job. But other than that one, most of them really outstripped the resources. I know, I believe Raleigh had one that went real bad fast. But when we're talking about old law tenements, or we're talking about older established apartment complexes, most of those buildings withstand fire fairly well. The ones that Ricky was talking about, the jury's still out on how long those things are going to withstand significant fire loading, in my opinion.
I mean, there's Scott. I mean, Scott can attest this. I mean, in Fairfax, if there's a vacant lot, within 5 days, they're going to put an apartment project there. I mean, it's.
Now, I will say that the codes have changed, so a lot of your siding is the hardy board, or there's actually a new product out that's synthetic of some sort, not as heavy as the cement board, and all that stuff sort of limits the fire spread. But I did something with Traditions for Fire Engineering a couple of years ago. Had one in an area I used to work, and the Texas donut style. And access was so bad that so the first 3 floors were parking garage, and then on one side you were able to get access to a common courtyard that was 3 stories up with a swimming pool and everything else. But that was your only access point for portable ladders. So we had to devise a plan where we put the portable ladders on the tower bucket and hoisted them up to get our first ground ladders in place.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I just these apartment projects. I mean, you go into Washington D.C. now. Good Lord, I mean, to get away from the apartment projects, you're talking about the ones like Bobby you were talking about. Back in the olden days, I mean, they're building 9, 10, 11, 12-story buildings at Owlwood. So I mean, it's and the code is crazy. I mean, I would say most of our 2nd and 3rd alarm fires that are in fully sprinkler buildings is all due to the fact of the outside in fire, from a fire that starts on the outside of the building, either, a brush fire or a car or something like that, or, a grill on a balcony, and then just runs the outside of the building, gets into the attic. All the apartments just get a lot of water damage, but we burn the roof off the place just because of the amount of wood that's in there. So, I mean, once again, how we're going to access it, how we're going to get to it, how many ladders we're going to throw. And, that also goes back to that engine stuff, but I know Scott and
Ricky,
Sam will talk about that.
You raise a great point, and I'll let Sam talk and Scott talk about in terms of operations. But I think one of the things to keep in the back of your minds now is that the testing that we have for floors and floor assemblies is based on 14-foot spans. Was developed in 1918, 1919, but it's still the same test we use today. It's ASTME 119. The problem with that is that when that standard was developed, floors had no void spaces. There was no channel that they were worried about, carrying large volumes of fire or having a lot of combustible materials and cabling inside of it. Today, when firefighters, guys and gals are going up above on those floors, especially in the buildings Ricky was just describing, that they do have those void spaces that can contain phenomenal amounts of fire and have fire traveling beneath their feet. So that's a horse of a different color. So what are you doing on the job these days? And all three of you are still working hard. I don't have any of that going on in my volunteer organization right now. So I'm not really dealing with it. The combo department that I hang with a little bit, they have some of that going on, not a great extent. And they're all, I think the tallest one is 3 stories. So what are you doing? How do you pre-plan an operational firefight on, say, the 3rd floor of a 5 or 6 floor, basically wood frame, high rise residential, with working fire conditions? I mean, what are you looking at there in terms of assignments and just thoughts for SOPs and equipment?
Sammy, you want to go, or you want me to hit that one?
Yeah, go for it.
I had a feeling that was the way it was going to be.
Yeah, I'll chime in because I
But I mean, so-
It's a
jump on
simple
too,
question, Hittle. It's a simple question, and we don't want any physics or algorithms or allusions to long dead prophets.
Well, I take my hippopotamus triangle and I put it against the building.
Gives my Pythagorean theorem, and then I ask Socrates if he thinks the skirt is too long.
So I mean, that's part goes back to one of those first questions that we talked about, where is that, the amount of resources that you're actually sending. So
yeah, resources and deployment. I mean, that's a serious question. You've got a working fire, 3rd floor, residential. And so what's the ballpark on number of apartments per floor in these things that you're seeing? 10, 12, 8?
It all depends on, we call a lot of what you were talking about earlier about the parking garage ones, we call those like donut buildings, where, they build a concrete parking garage in the center and then build the apartments all the way around it. So I mean, Dan Shaw and Scott Kraut burned down like a 5 or 6 city blocks. Dan did it for one of the, did it for you guys for fire engineering, talked about that particular fire, but
He burnt it down just for us. That's really kind of him,
exactly.
right?
Dan wanted to get on the show, so he had to have a reason to get on the show. So he decided to call 6 or 7 alarms with the apparatus. So, but I mean that,
Yeah, well, to Bobby's question, one of the things we've done, Ricky, is and I hate to say, I don't hate to say it, but you have to look at, and you brought it up, that outside in fire, which is very typical when you're talking about these buildings, because as a unit, they're pretty strong, but it's like anything else. You're not dealing with one homeowner now. You're dealing with a building full of irresponsible people. So so one thing that we've done is, well, 2 things. The first thing is we recognize the need for, we go full circle in the fire service. We recognize the need for big water quick. So we've definitely gone back to the blitz attack, or 2.5-inch lines for that initial knock, because a lot of these have open stairwells, large, as Chief Halton said, void spaces. So, for us, the first thing is to get a handle on this thing and get it in check. And then the other thing we've done as individual companies is we've learned to reverse engineer our lines. So we're doing a lot of bundle work, so we'll get the nozzle to the fire and rework it back to the rig, and whether that's dropping it over to the chauffeur outside to make that last connection. We've really worked, at least in my company, really worked hard at reverse engineering the line, so that you could estimate the stretch all day, but as you said, you turn the corner and now you've got 15, 20 more apartments like a high rise, and it's like, okay, well, let's get the nozzle at the door, get ourselves 50 feet to make the apartment, and then let's rework it back to the rig, and we've gotten pretty good at, obviously with practice.
So I mean, just the amount of resources that you have to send. So I mean, like, I always go back to like parts of Delaware, like Newcastle County, Delaware, which was like hey, there's a fire and only this fire station goes, but you're surrounded by fire stations. So they kind of got rid of that, as that area has grown as a suburb of Philadelphia. I mean, it's just proliferated with apartments and what we're talking about, the type of construction that we're talking about. So now they pull from all the departments to get a standardized complement of engines, a standardized complement of ladder trucks, a standardized complement of search companies, and chiefs also to all come in there to run this building, because one, they realize just if they have a fire and it's of any seriousness, just the amount of resources that you're going to have to need to get, to check the fire in the fire department. Then we got to start checking the fire above it, above that, and above that, just because of the construction. And then, if we have this flooring, like Bobby talked about, now we got to get down below. So how many lines are you actually going to need to actually attack the fire, or how quickly can you get the correct amount of lines in place with a number of engine companies? I mean, so if we need 5 lines, how long is it going to take you to get that number of 5 lines in place? So that's, one of the things when people go, hey, it's our fire, we're only going to call our company, and you have all these resources around you and you don't use them. I mean, obviously with career departments, usually, I know Scott's and my organization, you get 4 or 5 engine companies, 2 or 3 ladder trucks, and a couple chief officers, and we're there within 10 minutes usually. And we're able to, siege the building. But even then, even with all these people and all these fire apparatus, if the fire is well advanced and if it's in the void spaces and it's in the walls of the ceilings, if you're not calling for help quickly, that fire is going to get away from you rather rapidly and, create this conflagration, because that's all it is. All it is, a lumber yard burning, and we're going to burn the exterior and the roof away and then overwhelm the sprinkler system, because it's just, a life-saving sprinkler system in most of these places. So I'm sure Sammy has a number and a triangle assigned to that sprinkler system, but so it's a big problem. I don't think we've addressed it enough to look at it. I think because we always go, oh, it's sprinkler, we're going to be okay, and until we have the outside in.
That's the biggest mistake you can ever make. Right there. That's
Absolutely.
So, and I also think that, and I'll just let Sam take it over in a second, but if you're going to design a response to a multiple family building, I don't care if it's one of these toothpick towers or a condo or an 8-plex or 12-plex, your response should be predicated on the worst possible scenario, not food on the stove. You know what I mean? If you're doing that, it's going to be confined to one apartment, so you're just sending, a complement of 2 engines in a truck, you don't get it. You know what I mean? You can always send people back. When you start calling them, you're behind the curve, and we've all been there. So I hope that mentality is gone. You know what I mean? I hope that I haven't seen that recently, but Sam is on with us, so it might be, I'm just kidding. Good.
It's prevalent. I mean, we travel to a lot of small places, and it's disheartening to see. And we try to talk to people about that, and like I said, Newcastle County, Delaware was one of those places, and they saw that they got a lot of great chiefs there now, and that got an association going, got a unified response for all these independent volunteer fire departments. It's incredible to see that organization as it grew and what they're doing now for their community, because that's what it's really about. It's not about your ego or your fire department's ego, or it's about what we're doing for our community. So, Sam, I know we kind of robbed you there. So
yeah, go ahead, buddy. I'm sorry.
I'm not really sure where to interject on this. I will say this, going back to the original question, if I remember it correctly, where do you start? And that really starts with the building construction. I get really frustrated with people saying, oh, today's buildings are killing us. No, I've never read a NIOSH report where a building walked into a firehouse and off to firemen. Our lack of understanding of the buildings is what gets us in trouble. Buildings is an inanimate object. It's not going to kill us, but our failure to understand how they're built, how they're degraded thermally, and how our operations affect that is what gets us in trouble. And that really begins with watching them be built. One of the things that concerns me when you start talking about the testing from 1918 is we have construction methods, and like the chipboard that we're using for nominal lumber now, or like solid lumber using OSB. I mean, we've got apartment buildings where the stairs are built out of that. We have the floors that we're putting on TGIs, which are incredibly sound. If I'm going to put a piano in my house, then yeah, I want TGIs. But if I'm going to light my house on fire, I no longer want that piano over me. And we have stuff like what I refer to as a modern terrazzo floor. where we're laying down 1.5 inches of lightweight concrete on top of a wood floor, on top of TGIs. That's a lot of weight if we don't get underneath and make sure that that fire didn't start in one of those electrical voids that came back up through the walls before it even showed itself.
And that's very common when folks are doing radiant heat. That's exactly what they do. They'll lay that thin layer of concrete is then impregnated with cabling systems that carry a fluid that they can heat, and that's how they heat the home. So you don't have air ducts and stuff in the walls and the ceilings, or what we used to call radiators that were, the old style heating units in the apartments I grew up in. But so it is, and it's exactly what Sam just described. It's like a terrazzo floor, because it's basically how that radiant heat system works. It gets in there. So I think that's some really insightful stuff. I think Frank Brannigan always used to tell us, know the building, know your enemy. And I don't, some of the phrases I hate are things like buildings are killing us, or we're killing firefighters. We don't kill anybody. Firefighters get killed in the line of duty through all kinds of circumstances. So, and very few of them have to do with other firefighters, causing their deaths. So I'm with you on those kinds of phrases, Sam. But to your point, when we're talking about, I don't know, these apartments that I'm seeing today, and even the older apartments today, I think that the deployment models for them are much more nuanced and why I was really excited to hear about this conversation today. Oh, and here, two other things you said. Dan Dickerson reminded me, you said that the buildings are being degraded by fire, but the buildings are being degraded by a great many things continuously. In other words, just age, energy, heat and cold, expansion, contraction, and then renovation, and then unexpected uses, and then access stairs, and a whole wide variety of things can happen to a building throughout its lifetime. And so, and degradation by fire is when we arrive, which just compounds all of that other stuff that had been going on. So, and Dan from Kentucky lays out a great point about dead loads, which we haven't really gotten to, but apartment complexes and apartment buildings and even Toothpick Towers are notorious for having fairly significant dead loads on the roofs. And they may have membrane roofs. They may have a wide variety of roofing. Bill Guston's got a great article coming out on commercial roofs in an upcoming fire engineering that I just finished. So I'm kind of obsessed with roofs right now. We're doing a lot of roof research just to make sure Guston wasn't making stuff up. But anyway, but when you think about it, some of these HVAC systems, they could be, some of these 8 tons and 3 tons. Now tonnage doesn't mean the weight of the actual system. It's the amount of air in tons that they can move through a building over a specific period of time. That's how they're rated. They're given a tonnage rating for that's how they're put together. But they're a significant weight. They're a real significant weight. And then you add to it, loading from us. If we pour water up onto a portion of a roof that's intact and it can't drain, or we haven't created a drain for it, or the scuppers, what we call scuppers or whatever, are blocked, you can create an additional dead load, an undesigned dead load that can be really significant. And to Sam's point, pianos, gun safes, I'm not going to say, I used to have a great many guns, but we had a terrible boating accident and they're all at the bottom of a local lake now. But, folks that own guns, quick snide joke, but folks that own guns generally have gun safes, and they're a significant dead load. And where are they? They could be in an upstairs bedroom. They could be in an apartment complex, and that flooring was not designed, for that focused dead load. So just some interesting observations, Sam, and thank you for throwing degradation out there.
If you've never seen Sam play his grand piano in his living room, Bobby, you're really missing out on something.
Do you really play piano, Sam?
No,
Oh.
no, I wish I could.
One of his many talents. So,
Who
Bobby, we're getting close here.
who does play
2:00.
piano? Lasky. Lasky plays piano. Yeah. And a guy I know, Jay Stapleton, was it Stapleton? I'm screwing up his last name. Anyway, Jay Staden. He was a chief in Albuquerque. We were on the Combat Challenge team together. He used to, and then he was running the Combat Challenge for a few years. He was a concert pianist. Jay could play from memory Mozart, Bach, you name it. He could sit and play. Man, it was amazing to watch him play piano. Fantastic instrument. Sad to see it falling off the landscape.
Sammy, I think it'd be pretty cool. You and Gustin having dueling pianos. Gustin with a cigar at one end. It'd be what else could you ask for?
So let me throw this one out. One more question, and then we'll wrap it up, if you don't mind, Ricky. But this is a great question. What are your thoughts on improvised exterior and interior standpipes? I'm okay. Interior standpipes that are existing, I'm completely fine, and I'm okay with improvised interiors and exteriors. The one that I have a problem with is when people take an aerial device and they hook up and they make it a water supply. They make it a waterway. I think that's a tremendous. Now you've completely negated that apparatus for any other purpose, and that's a problem for me.
Sam, I've never seen you that animated in a long time, so I'll let you go.
No, I absolutely agree with the chief. Somebody just came home, so hopefully that's not annoying. But I completely agree, and I always told guys, if you want to use the aerial to help with hose, just take it to them and give it to them. You can use the aerial to go up 7 floors, and give them the hose, but just give it to them. Don't plug in. Hold on a second.
And I think the question came from Hunter Biden, by the way, or no, Hunter Baugen. I'm sorry. I thought the president-elect's son was chiming in. Hunter, I'm just giving you a hard time. It's got to suck to have a name like Hunter at this point in time. But it's Hunter. I didn't recognize you, but it's Hunter Baugen, Baugan. But the one really historical interior, and Scott can talk to this very elegantly, One Meridian Plaza. That was a Herculean effort to get a water up there because the standpipe that had been established was improperly installed. So those men and women at that particular fire, I can't remember how many floors they went, but I think it was like in excess of 40, 50 floors. It was amazing.
And they were humping 5-inch line up that stairwell. So.
It was unbelievable. We were just talking about the One Meridian Plaza fire where they had to lay. I can't remember how many floors, but it was a phenomenal stretch.
Yeah,
but I mean, so Scott, I mean, you and I both know. I mean, we in the area that we serve, and obviously, I think it's more prevalent than just the area we serve. Is that we try to do as much as we can off the engine. So I mean, if we stretch a 500 foot line, that's nothing. That's like a bumper line to most people. For us to stretch a 500 foot line, so
yeah,
I mean, that's reverse engineering.
Yeah, that's my point. I think the bundles are just so adaptable. It just makes for good sense. You got to train with them, no doubt, because like I said, typically you're going to, and to Hunter's question, that's really what we're talking about when we're dropping lines over the 4th floor, out the window or at the common space to hook back up is, you're really creating that exterior standpipe, whether it's done with a large diameter hose with a Y, which we will practice on the ground, with the setbacks, we can run that straight into the courtyard, put your Y on it. We drop ours out the window and the next company, can work off the same Y. The other thing for us too is that first line. We used to talk about backup lines, and I think that's something else we've really practiced on. Is that second company coming in? They need hose, no doubt, but more importantly, we got to make sure that first line, especially in these areas that we're discussing here today, where we're not estimating the stretch is kind of out the window. You can get out in your first due and really give it a go, but at least in my area, they're popping up so quick. I can do that 3 times a week and still not be absolutely sure. So, my transmission is always going to be have that second engine, assist us in getting that line in service, if not already done so, and then we can worry about that second line.
So On that same topic, Sam and Ricky and Scott. So exterior line, guy does they do an exterior waterway, tying it off. Recommendation every 50 feet, every 100 feet, because if you're extending that thing, that's a lot of weight. And even if you're doing a well stretch, I know in a well stretch, it's a little easier to tie it off. But if you're doing one up the exterior of a building, it's a little more nuanced. What are your thoughts on that, Sam?
Ray and I started talking about this a long time ago. When you look at the pressure of water, it reacts in 360 degrees, right? So I kind of look at hose. I question this because as I have hose, the weight of the hose might be pulling against the coupling, but the pressure in the hose is actually keeping the jacket up against the coupling as well, correct? It's not like I'm hanging all of that water weight off of the coupling itself. The hose is actually making a tower for me. It's kind of making more of a water column for me that's holding the shape of the water. So if that hose all transitions straight down into the ground, is it really being held on the coupling?
Well, see, but the problem with that becomes is that, yes, there's equal distribution of pressure inside the hose line, but that does not correlate to that exterior wall maintaining that continuity of the vertical dimensions. In other words, even though you have equal pressure, that can bow out for any number of reasons, and that equal pressure will do you absolutely no good if you have a curvature to that vertical column.
Correct. If you start to get curvature, then you do have that problem. And so if we can get all of that weight to column down to the ground, personally, that's one of the first places I want to get that weight pulled off.
See, but one of the things that happens in hydraulics and reaction, remember, as nozzles open and close, you have pressures that actually get transmitted throughout that column of water. So that can cause that bowing, which is why the securing becomes important, because if you just secure it at the top and you do one line and say you pipe pull and you jam it in the cornice, that might not keep your waterway may be GOWN when it hits that first blast of what could be easily 1,200, 1,600, 1,800 pounds.
Yeah, and it's an interesting argument, because like you said, if something changes, then do you need to tie off now? Like I told the guys the other day when we were addressing this on a third floor, at the very least, if the hose is trying to be pulled off of the balcony, because we did an exterior roof hook where we just moved the line up the outside of the balconies. And like I told them, if the line is trying to fall back off the other side of the balcony, then you definitely have weight pulling on it. So that's your first indicator that you need to tie something off.
I would be for I think for me, it's a default. I would never trust an unsecured exterior waterway, improvised exterior waterway. Just wouldn't trust it. I'm an old chief. I always expect things to go wrong, not right.
And honestly, we should be looking at it that way, but we're also looking at resources. So what can we do to get things moving? And we can start to button things up as we go.
That's a good point.
Yeah. And it really is a tough discussion. But like I told them, if the line's trying to pull itself off initially, we got to tie that off right away.
Well, that was my last question. I don't want to tie up Ricky's Facebook friends any longer. So, Ricky, if you want to, or Scott, do you want to chime in on? You want to try in on securing exterior waterways?
I mean, you got to do it. I mean, you got to throw a rope hose tool or some webbing on or something, at least at the top where we're coming in over the balcony. And then if you want to secure it other places, like Sam said, after you get more people there and get, you have all the people to do that, that's fine. But you gotta stop it from coming back down off the balcony. Scott?
Yeah, no, I agree. That's just part of our process. I mean, first off, you got to get enough hose up there to do your work. And, a lot of times that in and of itself solves the problem. But yeah, that's part of our process. I mean, once the line is reverse engineered, once it heads over the side, whether the window or the balcony, that's just part of that individual's task, is that to pull that small piece of webbing out, put a quick girth hitch on it and be done with it. And then as Sammy said, it's like tying ladders off, because more companies get there, and you want to tie it off again on number 2 floor or whatever, that's great.
I had the wonderful experience of standing at the window of a Chiefs car and explaining to him why I thought one piece of webbing was going to be good enough. I won't have it again, ever. So that's just where I'm coming from.
All right, so we've done about our hour. Trying to be mindful of everybody's time. We greatly appreciate. We had quite a lot of few questions on Facebook and on the Zoom conference. So we appreciate everybody's participation and helping drive our discussion today. So we greatly appreciate that. Your time is valuable, and we appreciate you spending time with Chief Halton, Fire Engineering Traditions Training today. It's been great, and we greatly appreciate it. So, Bobby, what's we got next week when's your next Humpday Hangout? You get to see them all. So
yeah, I get to see them all. I don't participate in them all. I only participate, kind of sporadically because I'm old and forgetful. So next week, I believe, is Rick Lasky, or no, it's Bill Gustin, and Bill's going to be talking about Bill. We're going to be talking about research and some of the validation that the research has done on some of our time-trusted tactics and some of the other additional insight we've gotten on it, and some of the refinement that we've gotten on tactics based upon this early research that we've been conducting. And when I say that, the American Fire Service, the fire service in the world has been doing research since we began. And you can go back to Braidwood, you can go back to Sylvia, you can go back to Clark. That we've had great research people. Now it's a little more codified and a little more organized with our friends from NIST and UL and Factory Mutual and all these great folks who are really assisting us now to get research out there. And plus with the web, which I think is just a passing fad. I don't think this thing is going to have any legs at all. But you can access the information and get to much broader audience, which I think is really important. And that's why I like this kind of putting this thing on Facebook and MeWe and Parler and Twitter and all these other places where we're putting this up, is that the more voices we can get and join, the fire engineering has always been devoted to the interests of the firefighters worldwide. In other words, anything that's of interest to you. And thank you to Hunter, and thank you to Tom and Dan for a couple of great questions there, because the conversation should be what's of interest to the firefighters, the people with skin in the game. Those are the only people that matter. I could give a hoot about some guy who went to college and then got a job as the chief of training somewhere. I want to talk to the kid who was an electrician and got into firefighting. I want to talk to the kid who was working on cars and became a firefighter. And I want to know what he thinks about what kind of braking system I should put on my new 105-foot aerial. I mean, I want to hear from the Hunter. And Hunter, your name of Bogan, is that how it was said? Bowen. Hunter, I apologize. And I want to hear from the Dan Dickinsons. I want to hear from the Tom Hegmeyers, man, and Matt Brumridge. Thank you all for doing that. Thank you for great questions and great participation. And that's what this forum is. That's what FDIC is about. It ain't about any one person or any one ideology or anything like that. Man, it's about everybody having a chance to stand up in the public square and say, hey, this is what's going on with me. What's going on with you? And as Tom Brennan said, nobody has to be wrong for him to be right. And him being right doesn't make anybody else wrong. And if it's working for you, God bless you. You know what I mean? Seriously. I know people out there that have white fire trucks. Unbelievable. And they work. They make them work somehow. I don't know how. It defies the laws of nature, but they make them work. Just kidding. It's stupid.
I don't even know where to go from here. So.
Reg, what do you do with that? What do you do with that, right?
But
Did you guys mention? I might have missed it.
Hey, I implore you to listen next week if you've never watched a Bill Gustin show. He's always got Sammy on there, Dan Shaw, and his whole group. From Vegas and everything. It's what a great hangout that is. Gustin is. Man, he's one of my heroes.
It's Gustin and Dugan show, correctly. So, yeah, it's Gustin Dugan.
I can't wait.
Yeah.
Well, hey, nice work on the Mayday Monday podcast too. That was good stuff.
Yeah, last night Yeah, we did a great Mayday Monday podcast last week. We did a tribute, and we had Pete Van Dorf on, and it was a lovely deal. And last night we recorded one which was phenomenal. We had John Sullivan, and we reviewed Worcester. Amazing, firsthand account from John, who lost two of his dear friends on his crew that night. And when you hear John, and I said it last night, when you hear John talk, if your eyes don't well up, you don't have a soul, because he went to that fire and lost 6 of his friends, and 2 of them rode in on his truck. So, man, just tough stuff. And remember, this is a tough month. You got Our Lady of Angels, you've got Keokuk, you've got Worcester. I'm probably forgetting half a dozen. But the month of December has never been kind to the fire service, at least the American Fire Service. So let's keep our guard up. Let's keep our eyes open. Let's have each other's six. Let's pay attention and let each other know we love each other, and we'll do everything we can to keep each other out of harm's way.
All right. I'd say we're out of here. Thanks, Bobby. Thanks,
Later,
Sam.
boss. Thanks for having me.